Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more minutes for the online participants and the rest of our colleagues to join. So yeah, we'll start in a few minutes. Thank you.
Ile input coordinação
Sim, sim.
né prim do riban.
Ini bene?
Hello?
Hello, you can hear me, right? Just test the audio. Mr. Yuki. Miss Yuki, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I do hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, masih ada tama na. Ito la precisa. Lalika ba hapang.
Good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome to the second spotlight session on building resilience to slow onset disasters and SIDS. I'm Akash and I will be your MC today. As you know, ESCAP recently launched the second generation of the Risk and Resilience portal on the 24th of July. Along with regional analysis, it also provides country-specific data and analysis. As such, I would like to invite Ms. Pragya Gupta, consultant ESCAP, to demonstrate the risk and resilience portal for Maldives.
Thank you, Akash. Good morning. Good morning, everyone who are present very early this session. Thank you for joining today's session on building resilience to slow onset disasters in SIDS. So I'll just share my screen. I have a small presentation and then I'll show the risk and resilience portal, which is dedicated to Maldives. Is it visible? Yeah. So Maldives is, of course, part of SIDS, and due to unique geographical nature and isolations, SIDS are very much vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and disasters, especially for slow onset disasters such as sea level rise. So I would just mention some of the highlights of the SDG funded project in Maldives, which are jointly implemented by UNDP and ESCAP. We are updating the Maldives risk profile based on the latest CMIP-6 SSP climate projection scenarios. We have brought the global agenda on disasters to local context to bridge the gap of science and policy for DRR and climate change adaptation in the country. We have used global scenarios of climate projection data with enhanced spatial scale to improve the visibility of risks at the atoll and island level. We have identified some of the pertinent sectors and relevant climate variables to develop the risk information and analysis. I will come in my later slides to describe how we are doing it. We have updated and enhanced the risk analysis by integrating stakeholders' feedback, suggestions, and priorities to make it more contextual and actionable. We have also enhanced the accessibility and utility of the data and analysis through dedicated country-specific decision support system under ESCAP Risk and Resilience portal. So when we were talking about downscaling the data for small island developing states, this is how we are doing compared to the 100 by 100 square kilometer spatial resolution of the global climate model. We have downscaled the scenarios into 5 into 5 kilometer resolution with the help of AP-PLAT. And also we are using the unique methodology to build the climate and disaster risk scenarios, which is the same methodology we are doing for the Asia Pacific region. And we have a one data ecosystem analyzing multiple data sets, for example, hazard data sets of different types of hazards, socioeconomic demographic data sets, and human development index as well to develop the risk scenarios. So I would just cite some of the examples of the risk analysis conducted for different climate change scenarios as part of this project. The slide up here, you can see the risk scenario for sea level rise. We have considered 4 climate change scenarios, 4 climate change scenarios and 1 baseline scenario. And for sea level rise, we could see that as you go from the baseline scenarios to higher emission scenarios, for example, SSP3 7.0, there are high chances of different atolls and islands which might have sea level rise up to 1 meter and more in by 2060. So high around the trends shows that there is, possibility of increasing sea level around the northern and the eastern, central eastern part of the country, specifically Ha Alifu, Hadalu, and Shaviani, and other northern and central atolls, which might get affected by sea level anomaly in future climate condition. So with this information, we have also used some sectoral information, for example, land use. This is the example of the impacts of sea level rise on the urban areas in different atolls, different islands. Many areas in Maldives, like 80% of its islands, are less than 1 meter above the mean sea level. So given the global sea level rising to 3 to 4 millimeters per year, there are chances that 31 to 50% of populations are likely to be exposed to sea level rise and related events in the SIDS. And through our analysis, we could find that around 14% of the urban areas, which has elevation around 0 to 1 meter, are under risk of 1 meter increase in sea level under the future climate conditions. Similarly, we have done the same analysis for agricultural areas. Though Maldives is not an agrarian country as such, but their recent agriculture policy is more focused on self-sustaining the country needs. For the agricultural areas, there are many areas in Maldives, different island, which are which supplies the main production of the agricultural products for the country, are under risk of 1 meter sea level rise. And how it affects it, the salt water from the sea comes into the land and then affects agricultural lands as well as the productivity. Similarly, we have also done analysis on the critical infrastructures. You can see from the graph that there are many critical infrastructures, for example, schools, colleges, and universities, which are considered as safe houses for during disasters. Government offices, health facilities, mosques, power sectors, power plants, they are under risk of increasing sea level. And many of them are located in low-lying areas, for example, 0 to 1 meter elevation, and they might get affected if the sea level rises above 1 meter. So now the question would be, also apart from sea level rise, we are looking into annual average temperature, which we relate with the drought-like scenarios. So annual average temperature for Maldives, as we can see from the trends, are likely to increase in future in higher emission scenarios in future. And the central atolls are likely to be more exposed to higher increase in annual average temperature and related impacts of drought-like situation in future. We have done similar analysis of the impacts of annual average temperature on the agricultural areas in Maldives. And we have found that there are many islands which have good, the significant areas under agricultural production might get affected in the future under different scenarios. So now the question would be, how do we use this information to enhance the resilience in countries like Maldives? The impacts of slow onset disasters are gradual and often ignored until it is acute. However, for slow onset disasters, having an extended period of forewarning and enough time for preparedness is really an advantage. In such cases, risk information can play a crucial role in minimizing the impacts. ESCAP Risk and Resilience Portal is one-stop shop for a repository of a vast array of scientific information on hazards, climate change, social, economic, demographic data that can be used by the policymakers for risk-informed decisions. So I would just now like to go quickly to the Risk and Resilience Portal, which many of you might have already seen during our different sessions, but I would like to show a page which is dedicated to Maldives, and we have uploaded some of the data from this project into the portal.
You want to share this one?
Yes.
Stop sharing. can share the window.
So under the risk and resilience portal, we have a dedicated decision support system for Maldives. When we go there, it directly focus on the Maldives country, and we have country-specific data sets. The data and information gathered through the Maldives SDG funded project is being uploaded in form of country-specific decision support system, and where the scientific evidence for the actionable disaster and climate strategies will be part of the portal, and it will be at the fingertip of the decision maker. The country-specific information is embedded on the RRP. Let's just look at the sea level rise scenarios. So this is the baseline scenario which we talked about a bit a while ago. So we have a guided tour here which can help you in understanding and comparing different climate change scenarios for sea level rise. So these are 4 climate change scenarios which we considered for this project. As we go along, we can see how the scenarios are changing and how it is intensifying in the areas, in some of the areas in Maldives. Also, we have we can compare the scenarios. Sorry. We can compare different scenario. For example, with the baseline. For example, with the baseline, if we compare the extreme scenarios, we can see what are the area we need more attention in future. Along with that, we can also overlay impact information, for example, population exposure. So we have included total population along with female population to understand the vulnerability. So if we go into this is Male. You can see this is the most populated island in Maldives. So, and also you can see the population exposure in different climate scenarios. Along with that, I can also focus into some other areas which are where more population are exposed to extreme climate scenarios in the future. For example, Adu et al. These are the islands which need more attention in the future. So we have also overlaid the information of critical infrastructure, which might be impacted due to sea level rise. Many of the critical infrastructure, as I said earlier in my slide, that they are located in the low-lying areas, and they are really exposed to sea level rise in future. So we have health facilities here. Location of the health facility, and of course we can change the scenario here to see what are the health facilities which might be at risk. Education facilities, mosques, and roads. If we go into the island level, we have roads, energy facilities. With the energy location of the energy facility, we also have the capacity of the energy infrastructure to see how much are the capacity which might get affected. Especially you can see this area, and then in Male, and the darker darker the dots, it means the capacity is higher and they might get affected in the future. We also overlaid the agricultural areas. For example, if we go into this island, they have significantly large agricultural areas which are more than 20 hectares here. And if we go to different scenarios, you can see that in future they might get exposed to sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. as well as in the urban areas. We have also overlaid here, uploaded the data for urban areas as well. So there are many urban areas where with, higher, larger area, urban area, which are under, which are at risk under future climate condition. Example in Adu et al. As well. So what do we do with this information when we know that which are the area at risk? For example, population at risk, we can help help the population by enhancing the community resilience through awareness programs and developing rehabilitation plans. We can the female population the number of exposed female population in under future climate condition or extreme conditions. We can always have our plans and action plans ready for them to reduce the vulnerability during extreme climate condition. Identifying the agricultural lands at risks helps to make strategies to address the saltwater intrusion issues, as well as give recommendation for suitable crops. Urban areas at risks needed to be identified to plan flood management strategies as well as drainage plans. Identifying the critical infrastructure such as power plant risks at risk helps to prepare risk-sensitive development plans. Also, understanding that what are the mosques and education facilities are under risk. It is good to have a information to plan for the safe houses in terms of disaster to help the preparedness. Last but not the least, when early warning for all is being advocated for all countries, especially for the vulnerable ones like SIDS, such rich risk knowledge with identified hotspots will efficiently guide the implementation of all the pillars in the countries. The country-specific decision support system under Risk and Resilience Portal is one step forward to make this knowledge and scientific evidence available and accessible to the decision makers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pragya, for demonstrating the portal for Maldives. As we will be moving on to the moderated discussion session, I would like to invite Ms. Farusha, Dr. Sanjay, and Mr. Sunny to the panelist desk. Now, I would also like to introduce Ms. Naina as our timekeeper and Ms. Farusha Ali Nasir, Director, Emergency Management, National Disaster Management Authority, Maldives, as the moderator for session. Ms. Farusha, over to you.
Thank you, Akash. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to this session on building resilience to slow onset disasters. In SIDS, rather saying disasters for the SIDS, if I may rephrase it to hazardous events, it makes more sense to the small island states, especially countries like Maldives, who does not really face disasters as such, however, is very much affected by annual hazardous events that faces in our country. So with me, we have three brilliant experts joining us today. We have one in person, Mr. Sunny, who is the Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery Team Leader, UNDP Bangkok Regional Hub, and we have two more joining online, I understand. We have Mr. Itesh Dash, the Regional Integrated Multi-Hazard Early Warning System RIMES. And then we have Ms. Yuki Yoshida from the National Institute of Environmental Studies in Japan. So after these presentations or the briefings, we'll open the floor for open discussions. So if I may please ask you to have your questions ready. And also for the participants joining virtually, you are also very much welcome to write any comments and questions in the chat if you have any. And to begin with the discussions today, I would like to invite Mr. Sunny to brief us on what and how you measure in terms of loss and damages due to slow onset disasters, in particularly for island states. He have been working on measuring loss and damages, and we are very much excited to hear about you. So the floor is yours for the next 7 minutes, Sunny.
Thank you very much, Farusha and Chair. Maybe a bit of context. So also my role, I also represent UNDP globally as a technical lead in ongoing discussions on climate loss and damage related to the COP process or the convention, also the Warsaw Implementation Mechanism, the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage. I need to mention that because the answers to the question that you are posing actually is evolving over time. They are not exact. They are changing as we understand better the loss and damage and the consequences. Having said that, though, there are agreements already in place, and based on that agreements in the convention, I will present answers to the question being posed. So the what to measure and the how to measure. Let me start on what to measure. If I run out of time, then I may not be able to finish the how aspect. So Pragya presentation already provided you some of the what to measure, no? The exposure of infrastructure with different types of hazards due to slow onset events is one critical aspect. But I think we should go back to what we mean by slow onset events as opposed to rapid onset event. Having said that, though, they're actually in a country like Maldives, they actually happen at the same time. The compounded effects of the intensity of the seasonal monsoon and cyclones that can happen. And sometimes it can happen due to a tsunami or an El Nino that is a seasonal variability, and intersecting with the impact or effects of sea level rise. So what do we mean by sea level rise according to the convention? One is SLR, which is already mentioned. The other one is increasing sea surface temperature, which we know can be a seasonal variability such as an El Nino, but it can be a more permanent increase in sea surface temperature because of climate change. The other one that we saw in Prang's presentation is the changes in precipitation patterns, which can be also as a rapid onset, but not necessarily related to the patterns of the monsoon. Coastal erosion, but the other thing that is not given a lot of attention is ocean acidification. Ocean acidification in a country like Maldives, where the coral reefs, the seaweeds, the mangroves are important attraction to its tourism industry. Ocean acidification is a slow onset event that can reduce or increase the mortality of coral reefs. There's no threshold yet, but during the 2015 to 2017 El Nino event, one anecdotal report from Maldives and even here in Thailand indicated that almost 97% of the coral reefs were damaged, although they recovered over time. But if the climate change will continue to happen, we can imagine how permanent the coral bleaching could be. And the threshold, of course, is very important to understand, because when the sea temperature actually exceeded certain threshold, probably the damage is already irreversible. So pick up a guess. What's the threshold of sea surface temperature that can lead into coral bleaching? Well, according to Thailand's maritime agency, they now see a 28 degrees Celsius significant increase in coral reef bleaching at 28 degrees Celsius. So if we get into that normal, then we have a problem. So that's the typology. You need to understand in your context, whether you're from PG or Vanuatu or Solomon Islands and other small island states, what are the typology of slow onset events. Then what do you need to measure? And here infrastructure was given some attention. The loss of livelihoods is very obvious, but not only about income generation, but also food security, the decline in tourism, for example, the beach erosion that can happen, the coral bleaching that I mentioned, the threats to biodiversity, which has to be valued because they are very important in tourism and fisheries, the increased healthcare costs, because climate change can increase heat-related illness. I don't know which country is not experiencing heat waves at the moment, including Thailand, the spread of diseases, and this can exacerbate existing health condition. And of course, the increased health cost that of course we have seen being acute during the pandemic. There's also, of course, the obvious issues of relocation and migration. There are several things in the context of any country, but we should not just be measuring the immediate impact, but also the cost of recovery, because for insurance, for example, you need to pay for insurance costs, you need to invest on recovery of infrastructure, and sometimes you need to relocate. Now, on the how aspect, I think I have 2 more minutes. This is still evolving in terms of process, but the most popular one is looking at historical events, such as basically putting a baseline of what is happening in the past 30 years. My colleague Rajesh is already supporting your country on that. Now he's sitting at the back of the room in establishing historical loss and damage databases in almost about 17 countries, or maybe more than 50 countries globally. They're not good predictors of what can happen in the future, but it can identify already where and who's getting affected and what in terms of the disaggregated climate, because the disaggregation can happen. So one obvious one is to establish what you know already, the historical aspect. Others need to be, in my view, need to be further developed, but the most popular how estimation is, of course, the climate downscaling model that Pragya mentioned. Maldives is an excellent example. We're hoping that with working with ESCAP, we can work in different other countries in this aspect. These are doable, these are usable science that we can do. But there are sectoral estimation or assessment that we can further advance, such as the use of post-disaster needs assessment. PDNA, of course, covers already 26 sectors, including ecosystem and biodiversity. So that can certainly be useful when an event happens to identify and assess loss and damage, including slow onset events, although that is one blind spot in the PDNA. I think for me, the more important focus on engaging with local communities by identifying their own typology of loss and damage, particularly non-economic loss and damage, is a very big effort that we need to undertake. Because people like us in the bureaucracy, we value sectors according to how we organize ourselves in our bureaucracy: land, transport, water, agriculture, food, blah, blah, blah. But when you talk with communities, loss is actually more personal to them, right? Especially the non-economic loss. There's an excellent paper in the Pacific Islands of quantifying and looking at the typology of non-economic losses. And I'm sure our colleagues from the Pacific Island states would identify themselves. The connection to land and sea when they have to move out. The life-sustaining tools, such as the indigenous knowledge that they will lose. The cultural sites and sacred places that will be damaged and irrecoverable. The health and well-being, not only diseases, but also mental health and other cultural dimensions of health and well-being. And my final point is that they are not isolated with each other. Both economic and non-economic losses are compounded in one geospatial place. And they are, unfortunately, as I have said during day one, they are more severe and more profound in small island states. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. We understand that you have a lot to speak, but we even if we give him like the whole day. He would have a lot to say. In fact, a very valuable points that is useful for the SIDS in terms of building resiliency.
The problem is
Thank
when to stop.
Of course. So moving on, I would like to invite Mr. Itesh. He will brief us on the RIMES supporting national meteorological services to make informed decision for slow onset disasters and how we can strengthen national climate services and effective early warning systems in SIDS. Mr. Itesh is joining us online. The floor is yours for next 7 minutes again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks to ESCAP for providing this opportunity for RIMES to talk about, the decision support system as one of the framework that we have been using in helping most of the member countries in the region in dealing with slow onset disasters. So again, thanks, Chair, and I will just try to be very quick. And sorry that I could not join you physically there, so I have to join online. But I think I'll just give you one example that we have done. Of course, not in the small island countries, but rather I will speak about decision support system tool that we have developed in India. In one of the states, coastal states, and more specifically focusing on, it is a tool that focuses on a multi-hazard aspect, but because we are talking more on, so slow onset disaster, so we focus on drought as one of the critical aspects as it drives the economy of the state to a large extent. So what we actually have done is, when we, I think we have seen some of these regional tools, platforms like the disaster resilience portal, or what we can do is actually bring, I think one of the things that Dr. Sani mentioned is, downscaling this information and localizing this information to, to the context of a country or area per se. So what we have done is, we have customized and contextualized the drought probabilistic prediction for the state. It goes as deep as into the blocks in the state. And in one way we have integrated the state's drought manual, and I think the drought manual is common for the country, where it completely and comprehensively provides the guidance in terms of how we generate these drought scenarios and the monitoring platforms. So we have used all the 3 parameters which we use for generally monitoring the droughts. Your agriculture parameter, hydrological parameter, and of course the meteorological parameter. One way that I think this is answering probably the how question that Dr. Sherry mentioned. So we what we have done is we have set this thresholds based on your climate and agriculture normal for a particular area, and then use that to generate triggers. So once you have the trigger set and it is activated, then actually you go to different levels of alert advisory generation process in the context. So the tool itself called the name is Satak. It's in English translates to alerts, and it provides alerts for both the rapid onset disaster as well as the slow onset ones. And we have integrated India Meteorological Department's climate information. We have derived most of the parameters indices that we have in terms of generating these advisories. We talk about the standardized precipitation index, SPIs, SPEIs, and on top, what we have done is localized at block level, the total deficit rainfall. And in addition to also the percentage of rainfall compared to the normals. And on top, you have consecutive dry spells that happen over particular season or so. So what happens? The system provides you kind of a comprehensive guidance on the upcoming for the current and as well as the upcoming season. In terms of what we expect in terms of the probability of a drought occurrence in the region. We also integrate some of the remotely sensed products, which I think you all are very much aware about in terms of we talk about the soil moisture data sets, or we talk about the NDVIs as it is, which are also integrated. So the point is, like when we talk about providing advisories and warning information to communities or more localized context, we have to bring that more local data sets integrated into the platform, and that is what something that we have tried in this particular approach, where we integrated localized data sets, local context information. And of course, from the agricultural perspective, we also integrated the crop zone areas, which is focusing more on what was the target and what was achieved, so we can always differentiate how much we are deviating from our targets. So in a way, we are also integrating the kind of the localized crop situation into your alert and advisory generation process. So this is localizing very much to the state, to the block level. And in terms of approach, this is customizable. This is, I think, very common structure and standards that is used. It is just that, how well we can collect and how frequently rather we can collect more localized data sets to generate advisories or warning services that will be useful for, if you're talking about our target user could be here, either at decision-making level, at policy level, or even at a farm level in the district. So the other thing is, the coordination between the institutions. I think here the India Meteorological Department and the State Disaster Management Authority working very closely with the Agriculture Department. So I think that is one of the very much critical aspect in terms of the coordination that needs to happen if you want to make any changes on ground, especially when it comes to providing support and helping in the decision process, the decision-making process. Decision support systems are just vehicle to help in it. I think ultimately the decision has to be made at this state and the policy making level. So I think that is where I stop. I hope I concluded within time, but if you have any questions relating to this, I will be happy to answer. But yeah, over to Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about the tools. Yeah.
Thank you, Hitesh, for sharing the details on RIME's support in SIDS. Next on the panel, we have Ms. Yuki Yoshida. Ms. Yuki, can you share with us from your perspective some of the challenges in developing risk information for SIDS, and where are the opportunities for us to work together to ensure downscale data is made available to member states? Ms. Yuki.
Thank you, Ms. Farouche, and thank you so much for having us. Apologies for me too for not being there in person. I would have much loved to take part in the broader event as well, but I'm glad to be able to contribute in this way. So I'd like to talk about some general challenges regarding risk information, as well as introduce AP Plat as one of the endeavors that my institution, the Center for Climate Change Adaptation, is undertaking to make downscaled data more accessible to all audiences. So I'll just kind of quickly gloss over some of the details, but clearly there is a need for specific climate risk information. This is generally acknowledged as a necessary ingredient, basically, for understanding and selecting adaptation options. It's also a critical requirement for undertaking the kinds of assessments that are necessary to access climate finance, which of course is one of the addresses one of the main resource issues in small island states. When it comes to availability, there are generally limitations in observation capacities, and so limitations in data coverage, and especially at the local scales. Another aspect that's often being increasingly considered is not just the availability of the data itself, but how the data is managed or made accessible. In many cases, data that is accessible is not discoverable or not well connected with other information sources that might provide a richer source of decision-making resources. And risk information is based on a complex process. It relies on climate projection data, which of course contains a lot of uncertainty. And then the risk assessment itself on the impact of vulnerability is the basis for which adaptation options are developed and considered and chosen. But at each of these stages, there's the uncertainty, there's multi-sectoral, cross-disciplinary aspects. And so nothing is very simple. The methodologies related to each of these steps are also, a whole field of scientific research as well. And so given this, the development of risk information, even within, say, a single discipline or scale, is quite complex and extremely resource intensive. Even if the financial resources were there, the computing resources for downscaling requires a lot of time. And then on top of that, there's the point of uptake, which also relates to knowledge management, but is also more about the recipients. So there is also the question of whether the users are able to appropriately receive, understand, and then apply the data that is made available. And then some concerns, hesitations, trust between the information developers and users also come into question. There are concerns about misuse or misinterpretation of information. And then in these days, intellectual property rights also further complicate the matter. Given the complexity of the data development process, the users will have to incorporate that uncertainty at each stage of that development in their decision-making as well. And here I'd like to switch gears and introduce AP-PLAT, the Asia Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Information Platform. This was launched by the National Institute for Environmental Studies in Japan with the goal to contribute to the sustainability and resilience of the broader Asia Pacific region. And the activity that we do at AP-PLAT is based on 3 pillars: providing tools, providing the scientific information that is readily available, and then providing capacity development for our users. And the information platform basically is a website that's accessible from this QR code or from this link right here. We continue to develop it. It's only a few years old, and we're increasing the content on a yearly basis. So I encourage you, if you haven't come back to it for a little while, to keep checking it. We're improving it as we speak. But today I'd like to highlight ClimateCast, which was made with the intention of making climate projections accessible to anybody, and to make it very quick and easy to access. It enables, just like the earlier model introduced with Maldives, visual comparisons, in this case across climate scenarios and models, downscale to the local scale. I'm afraid in many of the small island states, the whole country did show up as the local scale. But for example, in the case of, say, Fiji, different islands, predictions showed up for different islands. But yeah, Maldives showed up as one country level data. The data also is downloadable, so can be applied further on. The point here is, again, the accessibility. So given the resource intensivity of climate data downscaling. This is something that, I have colleagues who are specializing in taking into account, for example, the topography, et cetera. This is still a process that's undergoing, development, and then again, takes a lot of computation resources to actually make available. ClimateCast kind of comes in as, well, we can't be waiting around for the perfect data to come around. So it's, well, my boss likes to say it's the fast food version. The accessibility is the point. It's interpolated data, so it's not necessarily taking into account topography, for example, but a lot more accessible than the other data that is available at the global level right now. We are also providing various tutorials, or including on YouTube. And so in this way, I guess we see an opportunity to support the adaptation going on in the region in general, but of course, including small island states, by providing this kind of immediate access to local scale data and bridging that scientific information and stakeholders. That's it for now from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Yuki, for that very insightful presentation. Now we are done with the panelists. If we can focus on this session on building resilience in SID, and let me open the floor for any questions, both physically and virtually. Do we have any questions online? Oh, yes, we have one.
Thank
Please.
you, moderator, for this excellent session this morning. I really appreciate, the opportunity to hear from our technical experts. I'm from Fiji, and it's really enlightening to note the kind of technical work that's been done by ESCAP and other stakeholders in order for us to be able to pinpoint the kind of assistance that our small and developing states will need. Just a couple of comments. First, let me thank Ms. Gupta for the excellent presentation on Mauritius. I think, sorry, on Maldives. But I think it really portrays the important work that needs to be done. I don't know how extensive the work is in terms of other small island developing states. For us in Fiji, I know it's the island, the geography is much bigger than Maldives, but it's encouraging to note, the kind of work that's already been done on the ground in the Maldives, and that's giving us some sort of aspirations to try and be more tactical in the way we present our situations. So I'm not sure whether that model is also working in Fiji. You guys will know. I'm just speaking as we go along from here, and I think that one of the important points that the last speaker, is it Yoshika? Ms. Yoshika mentioned about the importance of the models for all of us. My view is that these models should not compete, but complement each other in obtaining results, for the small island developing states. It's such a crucial work for us. As we all know, the sea level rise is a major challenge that we're all facing. Now that the long-term temperature goal has been forecasted, to overshoot in the next couple of years by the IPCC in their recent report on AR6. It's worrying because it's going to complicate this model work that all of you are doing in trying to help us small island developing states to be able to pinpoint the areas that we would like to address. And the sort of lead that that Maldives is identifying the areas, the sectors to be pinpointed like critical infrastructures. I think this is really important for us. Sea level rise will heavily affect us. And the other point with Sunny, your presentation is really encouraging as always. I've heard you for a number of days now, the manner in which you present. You're so full of vibrancy, and and I thank you. I thank you for the good work that you're doing. As I said earlier, the slow onset. This is what is really affecting us. You mentioned a bit about Fiji. To relocate a community from Fiji, from lower grounds to a high ground, that's another battle for us internally, because now we see that can cause security problems for us. And if you can imagine bigger countries like India, to try to relocate a particular community to another because of land tenure system. Who owns the land? What Sunny mentioned, the traditional knowledge. There's a fear that we will lose all this. So these are the sort of essence, the sort of information that we would like, to be captured in this model, to be able, for us to be to enable us to determine what is really the best course of action that we will need to do. The relocation and migration and the challenges that it faces for us, it's going to be a huge issue in the smaller developing states. We don't have the luxury of land and resources. But again, if these kind of models can help us, to pinpoint what sort of actions we need to do in the future, I think it will really help us a lot. Thank you very much for listening to a long narration.
Actually, thank you very much, sir, for that valuable comment. And I really like the wordings that you said. The models, not only the models, the systems should not actually compete each other, but it should complement each other so that it makes things easier for the small island states where we like things simple and easy, right? So thank you very much for that. Do we have any other questions or comments from the floor? I see none. So before we close this session, I think we should hear a closing from Mr. Sanjay. So please, Sanjay.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. We are really privileged to have two leaders in the room, the leaders from the Pacific sits, our Excellency Ambassador of Fiji. We are really privileged, sir. And the leader from Indian Ocean sits, Maldives, Madam, and the team. So we have got the perspective from two islands of Pacific and Indian Ocean. So it's a great privilege because we wanted to understand the voices, especially from the community, from the leaders, what kind of technical assistance or the knowledge that we can generate, which should be helpful to the countries, and that's a very helpful. We started with Sunny. Thank you, Sunny. As Ambassador said, you are always full of knowledge, wisdom, experiences from the ground. The work which Pragya presented, this is an effort to take assessment report IPCC 6, translate on ground, and what you heard is an effort in this direction. And we have used our collaboration with AP Platt that you heard, the complementary nature of the models. We had a lot of a struggle, which could be the best fit in Maldives context. We need to do similar thing in Pacific when you take it to forward. This is where we need many on ground understanding of the risk. I have just 2 points. I have only 1 minute. One, which I think Sunny and also Itish highlighted, is the trigger for slow onset disaster, an extreme event. El Nino is one which is trigger driven. The trigger we get months in advance, so we have to understand the trigger in different contexts. It matters. This is where you need to understand the trigger. You bring science agencies, your hydromet agencies to understand trigger, translate in form of the risk scenarios. For slow onset in Pacific context, Sunny highlighted coral breaching in Thailand context, 28-degree, but it varies from the different island, different context of these Pacific states, Indian Ocean states. But what I would like to highlight, just important point, which we experienced as a disaster management, particularly early warning community. In the recent time, His Excellency would have seen the tropical cyclone are becoming intense. It gets intensified suddenly. when you predict the cyclone genesis, what is called, you understand it could be a cyclone of 120 kilometer, 130 kilometer per hour speed. But during the course of its progression, it gets intensified, becomes 200 kilometers. And this trigger is the sea surface temperature trigger, which varies. In Arabian Sea, the trigger is very different. In Bay of Bengal, trigger is very different. In Pacific, East Pacific, different, West Pacific. And this is where you need to understand when cyclone is going to change its track, going to become more intense. Those are some certain nuances of the science, which we need to understand. We are trying our best to bring this in form of many reports through many platforms like Tropical Cyclone Committee in Pacific, Panel on Tropical Cyclone in Indian Ocean region. So these are some of the science which slowly we will be coming. Sunny, about the estimate on loss and damage. I think all estimates perfect if those are based on the science and the practices on the ground. So we have heard many examples. Last but not the least, for us, this interaction or dialogue with you, sir, from Pacific and from Indian Ocean is a great learning experience. It will feed into our work of many work that we are doing in ESCAP, including the portal, which this is a very dynamic process. What you saw is at what is portal 2.0, we will have portal 3.0, 4.0, and we will capture all the risk attributes, including the triggers that I was highlighting, and we will present to you something which will work in a different country's context. So thank you very much. This was a stock taking, getting from the two leaders of the Pacific, small island countries, and thank you very much for this spotlight.
Thank you, Sanjay. As we are already running out of time, I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to discuss more on this topic. So just let me wrap up this session, just summarizing what we have been discussed today. From the beginning, from Sunny's presentation, we understood the first point that main takeaway that I'm going to take is that loss and damage measuring on what and how are evolving every day. So it's like we need to have new innovations, new ideas in this aspect. And he also reflected on what slow on disasters are. I like the fact that he talked about ocean acidification, which is very important for a country like Maldives and other small island nations, which poses a huge impact on our small island states. And also on the aspect of what to measure, he did discuss on the exposure to infrastructure, services, life loss, and also he focused on food security, fisheries, and economic loss as well. And on how aspect he did mention about the importance of historical data and the indigenous knowledge and local knowledge in terms of loss and disaster damage data. He also discussed that how loss and damage estimation can contribute to SIDS. For instance, it provides critical information that enhances the understanding of loss and disasters, as well as how it facilitates evidence-based decision making. From Mr. Das, we understood that the RIME support by SIDS providing reliable and timely forecast, and through capacity building, through technological products and services, which is customized to the needs of the countries that the RIMEs offer. And also he focused on the collaboration and coordination, especially between the countries, and the need of continuous research and innovations on climatology. And from Ms. Yuki, we actually understood the need, availability, and the knowledge management of risk information. She also highlighted the complex process of developing risk information, which includes climate projection data, risk assessments, and adaptation options, which all are quite challenging. And also she mentioned about the user capacity on receiving and understanding and applying the information that is in the risk information, and also highlight a very important point on the concerns and the reluctancy which the users may have due to trust and integrity of the developers. And also she did brief us on a bit on the AP Plat and its three pillars, which is the scientific information, capacity development, and the tools that they offer. So that's basically what we discussed within last half an hour. If there is nothing else, by thanking our panelists and Sanjay, I would like to close this session. Thank you very much and have a good day all. Thank you.
I would like to encourage people to stay back as our next spotlight session on disability inclusive DRR will start in this meeting room.
you for your patience. I think we will begin shortly, maybe in a few minutes. Apologies for running over a little bit, but I think we've had very interesting discussions this morning, and hopefully we'll have more discussions in a few minutes. I think we can start in another maybe 5 minutes. A very good well, still morning. A very good morning to everybody here on the third spotlight session of our ESCAP Disaster Resilience Week. This week, we really have been discussing some of the key elements of transformative adaptation for disaster risk reduction. And this session particularly is relevant for building resilience for all and ensuring that no one is left behind when a disaster strikes. And this session will focus on disability and gender inclusive disaster risk reduction. So without further ado, I would like to begin by requesting Ms. Titiana Bonapace, Director of ICT and Disaster Risk Reduction Division, to provide the opening remarks for this session.
Thank you, Madhu, and a very good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to give you opening remarks because as the impacts of climate change and climate-related disasters increase, the integration of disability and gender considerations in DRR demand our immediate attention. And the vulnerabilities and challenges faced by persons with disabilities, many of whom, as we know, are aging and women in times of disasters, really needs to be placed at the center of our actions. Just to give a few examples, persons who are sight and hearing impaired, or wheelchair users, or persons who have intellectual disabilities may not be properly informed on imminent disasters due to their lack of accessible information. Wheelchair users might not be able to get in and out of the emergency shelters in time. Persons with autism might not be able to find calming rooms at the shelters either. And similarly, women from particularly those from marginalized communities, face unique challenges, increased risks of violence, limited decision-making power, and reduced access to resources and services during disasters. Unfortunately, we have ample evidence, plenty of evidence on all of these challenges occurring. We estimate that there are more than 750 million persons, constituting around 16% of the region's population, that live with disabilities. And the numbers are expected to increase, not least because the populations are aging. And as we know ourselves, and I can certainly attest to that, as I am an aging person. In fact, everybody is aging. From the day you are born, everyone is aging. But at a certain point in life, the aging process is progressive. And so as we can see from ourselves, our families, and friends, our functional abilities on mobility, recognition, seeing and hearing decrease. And so even though we may not officially be recognized as a person with disabilities, we know that increasingly many people in society will have difficulties in responding to the tremendous challenges that disasters place for the individuals and for societies. And for us to prevent harm, injury, and loss of precious lives, preparedness is key. And disaster risk reduction policymakers and practitioners, as yourselves, have a critical role to play. Now, from the ESCAP perspective, to help us all build a more inclusive and resilient future, we have contributed through an initiative called Disability Inclusive DRR, also known as DI-DRR. And we are very pleased to be launching today an e-learning tool called Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction. It is our responsibility. And this tool will enable disaster risk reduction policymakers and practitioners to understand basic concepts of disability and how practicing DI-DRR can help save lives of people and can help older persons, families with small children, and those who are not familiar with the main language that is used in a disaster impacted country. And so I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the government of Japan, without which the financial and technical support that they have provided, this work would not have been possible. And I also express my thanks to the Social Development Division, our colleagues there, with whom our DRR team has worked closely and seamlessly, and we've worked collaboratively across disciplines. And as we all know, it's not always easy to work across disciplines because each discipline has its language, its jargon, its way of thinking. But when we do work across disciplines, it can be very enriching, and it can really open up much broader perspectives and much bigger ways of thinking. So I'd like to express our thanks to our colleagues in the Social Development Division. And we do hope that this work can continue to evolve in the future. So together we were able to develop a tool that integrates disability and gender considerations into DRR. And it also offers a range of modules that cover key topics such as disability inclusive emergency planning, accessible communication, inclusive sheltering and evacuation, and disability rights and advocacy. And so we sincerely hope that this tool will be useful and helpful to you all. So the path forward for resilience in the face of an uncertain climate lies in embracing a comprehensive and intersectoral approach. By continuing to work together across the disciplines, we can ensure that our actions are effective, equitable, and sustainable. So let us continue to work together to forge a future where everyone, regardless of their ability, their gender, their age, can thrive in the face of adversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bonapace, for your remarks. I would now like to request Ms. Villani Remengaso from the Pacific Disability Forum to give a keynote on the importance of DI-DRR in Asia Pacific. Unfortunately, Ms. Villani, who is in Palau, had an emergency last minute, and there's a tropical cyclone potentially initiating in the Pacific, and the power is down everywhere. So really showing that hazards are truly transboundary, and a tropical cyclone in Palau in a very small way is affecting us here. So she has kindly sent her remarks, which I will be sharing on her behalf. So we're just waiting for picture. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to speak before you on behalf of the Pacific Disability Forum and also in support of all persons with disabilities across our region. Persons with disabilities are often overlooked throughout the disaster management cycle and especially during relief operations, and are seldom considered as important actors in conflict prevention, even though they're often more exposed during conflicts and displacement. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in its Article 11 and 32, requires that persons with disabilities benefit from and participate in disaster relief, emergency response, and disaster risk reduction strategies. Asia-Pacific countries have ratified the CRPD. Ratification requires member states to align legislation with the CRPD. As such, disability inclusion is no longer only an ethical and moral consideration. Disability inclusion is increasingly required under law. DRR involves disaster management, disaster mitigation, and disaster preparedness, and is also part of sustainable development. In line with Articles 11 and 32 of the CRPD, disability inclusive DRR considers the whole community, but pays specific attention to persons with disabilities and their families, since their vulnerability in a disaster might reduce the entire community's resilience towards catastrophe. Considering the need to promote inclusion and equity, we need to understand and implement Article 11 of CRPD, build knowledge and skills around the precondition for inclusion, legally harmonize and inclusive budgeting, equality and non-discrimination in humanitarian situations, social protection in humanitarian situations. We need to include the role of CBID in humanitarian situations, as well as build sustainable advocacy strategies to align DRR and climate change policies and practices. Diversities and the specific needs of persons with disabilities need to be recognized, and also their interconnectedness. In particular, women and girls with disabilities who are usually further marginalized and are vulnerable, whether it's preparedness and recovering from disasters or understanding and grappling with the impacts of climate change. Processes of inclusion are only effective when they result in equitable change. This requires political will, prioritization, and investment. Investments in disability inclusion are investments in whole society resilience and are critical to reaching our commitments. Without these, persons with disabilities will be left further behind and disaster risk will increase for all. Looking ahead to the future, the following are some of the priorities ensuring commitment to disability inclusion in DRR. We need to ensure DRR policies and legislations are fully CRPD compliant. We need to widen and improve the use of disability data to better understand disaster risk, improve reporting and measurement of impact, and to facilitate evidence-informed decision-making. We need to increase investments in disability inclusive DRR, including direct resourcing for OPDs in recognition of their leadership and contribution to achieving regional and national policies and strategic outcomes. We need to move from isolated and standalone initiatives to the full integration of disability inclusive DRR across programs and practices. We also have to avoid tokenism and box ticking and proactively ensure the full and meaningful participation and engagement of persons with disabilities in DRR decision-making. Persons with disabilities are key to making partnerships meaningful along with partners. Partnership built at the core of Leave No One Behind principles is key to successful implementation of the disability inclusive disaster risk reduction policies and programs for working together to achieve our vision of an inclusive and equitable Asia Pacific region for persons with diverse disabilities. Colleagues, let's not forget that we cannot implement the disability inclusive DRR policies and programs for persons with disabilities without persons with diverse disabilities. And I quote, "Nothing without us." We look forward to continuing to work together to make these rights a reality. So we would absolutely like to thank Ms. Remengasu, even though she's not here online, she's here in spirit. And I truly thank her for those remarks. To enhance the integration of disability and gender aspects in disaster risk reduction, ESCAP has developed an online e-learning tool. This e-learning tool can help policymakers understand the operationalization of this integration. May I now request my colleague, Ms. Aiko Akiyama from ESCAP, to present the e-learning tool.
Thank you, Madhu. And then good morning, everybody, esteemed policymakers on site and then on Zoom. May I now present the effort of our collaborative endeavors between SDG and IDD called ESCAP e-learning tool on disability inclusive disaster risk reduction. It's our responsibility. Yes, thank you very much. Three things I'd like to touch upon during the next nearly 10 minutes. Number one, background information and important messages regarding this e-learning tool. Number two, structure and main content of the e-learning tool. Number three, how to actually access a tool. In terms of background, as Ms. Tiziana clearly delivered in her opening statement, yes, 16% of any country's populations have some kind of disability. So at minimum within a region, 750 million persons have disability. But is this tool only for this 16%? I use the word only as if it's not a big number. But what I like to say is if we do families, friends, people who happen to be in a foreign country and then they don't understand the language that's going around, or persons who are carrying a big luggage, or persons who are temporarily injured, or families with young children and pregnant lady. So the percentage could go up to maybe 40 or 50. So the message here is DIDR saves all. So which is a good message for your esteemed dear policymakers and professionals, because your job saves all. In order for that to happen, universal design, accessibility, community level inclusive preparedness are key factors. Sorry. Okay. So what is this course? So I've been saying esteem the disaster risk reduction policymakers and professionals. You are the primary target of this course, because I know that you can make changes at the policy level and then at the ground level. We count on you. So yes. Also, how long is this course? I mean, many people don't want to take like 3 hours, 4 hours, and 5 hours. So we designed the course. Hopefully we can finish the course within 2.5 hours. We also devised these characters. One person is Keiko, just fictional characters, the policymakers, and then conversation between Keiko and then Montian, who is the actually real person here in Thailand, and he's a senator and he's blind. So it's not just like reading a textbook. You can kind of also join in the conversation virtually. 7 modules are contained in this tool. Number 1, introduction to the e-learning course. Number 2, the social model and barriers. What is the social model? Have you ever heard of social model here in this room? Please raise your hand of disability. Okay, thank you very much. That's why this course is important, to get to know about social model of disability. Number 3, accessibility and universal design. Module 4, unpacking mandates and policy drivers regarding disaster risk reduction and disability inclusion. Like Tiziana said, module 5 talks about mega trends in disasters and disabilities, including climate change, population aging, and all. Number 6, okay, so much about theory and then what to be done, but how do you actually implement DIDR? So we devise steps for central government DR policymakers, and then also steps to be taken by local government DR policymakers and practitioners. Number 7 is interesting because we actually asked the course taker to think about the stakeholders and then what kind of roles they can play. And as Virani says, engagement of persons with disabilities are critical, not just inviting them for lunch and then hearing about their needs, but engagement throughout all the process of policy making, budgeting, and implementing, and monitoring and evaluating. So we write to ask you to fill in some information, and you upload that onto this e-learning tool, and then you are done. So after all, what do you get? You get inside practical knowledge and how to do the idea and your action plan, which I was just talking about, and which is also projected on the screen, and certificate issued by ESCAP with Tiziana's name and our division director's name and ESCAP logo. So you can be proud of it. And you in your country can integrate this, taking this course as a part of a mandatory capacity building training to as a criteria for performance for your subordinates and workers at the disaster risk reduction department. Because we're talking about persons with disabilities, this e-learning tool is also accessible. So here, sorry, can you see this? There's a voiceover function which you can manipulate. Sorry, I can, yeah. And this could be reduced in size depending on where you are. So you can actually listen to what is said. In addition, we have other functions such as manipulating contracts of colors, and then also making the size of the text bigger or smaller, or spacing between text, and then other functions. We did our best given our platform of this e-learning tool. So how do we access? You actually go to our famous resilience, risk and resilience portal, and on the computer there is a e-learning and knowledge tab, and you click there, and then there is a tool. Right now, I know you want to do it through your iPhone, which you are doing, but right now the mobile application we need to work on. But anyway, that will, when you read a QR code right now, it will lead you to the risk and resilience portal. And once you are in there, you need to find the e-learning and knowledge tab there. But perhaps at this point, I would like to recommend you to go to your computer and do it. But there are 2 courses there. And then, so once you go there, sorry, I need to go back one. So you need to create your own account, and then we will approve that you are interested in taking this course, and then you are ready to get started. Sorry that we have this approving process, but we just want to make sure that this will not be abused in the sense of like having different people and then just checking in, but because we do issue official certificate. So once you approved, you were going to be on this side or opinion, and you press a catalog, and there are two courses. Yeah. And then one is a silver course, and another one is a golden course. Silver course is what I was describing. The golden course is one step ahead. We just ask you to monitor the implementation of your action plan, which you already have done. Clear? More or less. Okay, thank you. So that was a very quick virtual walkthrough of the essential message, and then structure, and then component, and then accessibility feature, and how to get to the tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Aika-san. That was the presentation of the e-learning tool. And we urge you to go to the website. It's rrp.unescap.org. And like Aiko-san said, if you go scroll through the knowledge and e-learning tools, you'll find the e-learning tool there. And we really hope that you start maybe even looking at it and providing us with feedback if necessary as well. Now I would like to move to our panel session, and I would like to invite Ms. Akiyama to moderate our panel session with our distinguished guests. We have Ms. Farusha Ali Nasir, she's the Director of Emergency Management and DMA Maldives. Dr. Suman Karna, who is the Urban Governance and DRR Specialist in Nepal, and Mr. Muhammad Atif Sheikh, who has joined us from Pakistan. He's the Executive Director and Special Talent for Special Talent Exchange Program in Pakistan. So welcome, and without further ado,
thank you, Madhu. Once again, actually, Ms. Virani was supposed to be a moderator, but according to the reason that was stated by Madhu, I will be replacing her as a moderator. Welcome to this panel, and then I think we spend about 30 minutes to discuss some policy issues, implementation issues, and way forward for DIDR. We have a distinguished panel here. I will just introduce the names, and then we go actually into each person's presentation and remarks. So the first person who is in here at this table is Ms. Farusha Ali Nazir, Director of Emergency Management, NDMA, Maldives. Welcome her. Yes. And then the person sitting right next to me is Dr. Suman Karma, Urban Governance and DRR Specialist from Nepal. And online, we regret he could not be here, but Mr. Mohammad Atif Sheikh, he's Executive Director of Special Talent Exchange Program, also known as STEP, from Pakistan. So let's ask Ms. Farusha, welcome, and then we'd like to know if your country has disability inclusive disaster risk reduction law or policy or programs. If so, how disability perspectives are integrated? Is that just a declaration or more detailed provisions? Question number one. And I also merged another question for you. What are the actual challenges of implementing DIDR in your country? So if you can spend 5 minutes responding to these questions, I would be most grateful, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I won't take much of your time today. So focusing directly on the question, the first question, do we have a law that integrates DRR and disability? Unfortunately, we do not have a such law as named like way, but then we do have our disaster management law, which pretty much is very comprehensive and broad, and all aspects of DRR and emergency response is being brought up in the Disaster Management Act. By saying that, we do have number of frameworks, regulation, and also SOPs in terms of integrating disability into disaster risk reduction. However, talking about practicality, I would say we still have a gap when it comes to PWDs and DRR. However, yes, we have a very standard, comprehensive frameworks and regulations when it comes to providing services to PWDs during disasters. So in terms of relief aid, evacuation, and so on, we do have regulations and frameworks which enables customizing the services as per their need. But as I mentioned earlier, when it comes for the disaster risk reduction, which disability and DRR are actually very much interconnected topics that involve ensuring the safety, protection, and inclusion of the PWDs throughout the disaster management cycle. That is where we still need to work a little bit on. By saying this, we do some programs. There are some programs that is being currently doing under this aspect. We actually very much promote an all-inclusive DRR, not specific to disability, but it's all-inclusive, which also includes migrant vulnerable populations as well as PWDs or disabilities. So through this approach, we try to have a lot of programs. Of course, we say our sister agency, which is we have one colleague from MRC here in the hall as well. So Maldivian Red Crescent actually has been one of our closest partner in terms of implementing DRR, and they actually have been doing a lot of training programs, especially customized to the needs of the PWDs, which includes first aid, psychosocial programs as well. And we have a very close connection to one of the NGOs, Blind and Visually Impaired Society of the Maldives. So they have been a very good partner for us. But when it comes to disability, it's not only visually impaired. There are all other aspects of disabilities which we need still to focus and strengthen on. Also, I would like to highlight that we are currently under development of some regional emergency operation centers. So that would be the first infrastructure as such, which is localized in communities. So during the designing phase of the regional emergency operation centers, a special focus was given to the accessibility of persons with disabilities. So we made sure to have those aligned into our infrastructure in the regional emergency operation center. So I believe that it's a very good beginning for us. And just focusing on the challenges, actually, I see a 60 seconds. So of course, we do have a lot of programs that is targeted for PWDs, but we often understand there is some kind of reluctancy from the parents or the public in participating or contributing to this program. So there we understand that we need to do a little bit of advocacy or strengthening. And so one thing that just 1 minute I wanted to highlight is just to ensure the participation of the PWBs, we actually need to remove or rephrase the disability with specially abled communities maybe, so that we use their strengths with providing them the special requirements that may need for them to commit to our programs as well. So maybe in this technological era, to have assistive technology, I'm not sure if your e-learning tool is for the disabled, the accessibility of disability. I'm not sure about that. So this assistive technology is very important. Specializing these trainings is actually very important. Also including these communities from the planning process itself is really very important. Also, the last one I would say is empowering the NGOs who are actually doing the work on disability is something that is very crucial for the government agencies like NDMOs to carry on. So yes, since the time is up, I think I would stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for being on time and also covering all questions and then the important message of empowering and then capacity building of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations and working with them from the very beginning. But it was interesting that you mentioned about the reluctance from the community itself, which makes us think about deeper into the reality of communities. So with that in our mind, may I also ask the same questions, which I will repeat to Dr. Suman. So in Nepal, are there any laws or programs or policies which are, I mean, I'm talking about disaster risk reduction policies and laws and programs that incorporate disability perspectives? If so, how? Then even given that, what are the challenges of implementation of the idea? Floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry for the bad throat. Okay, as I was told, and as you put your question, like about the DIDRR legislative provisions and some challenges in Nepal. We are, I think, very much in a similar situation of what our colleague from Maldives had just explained. We don't have a DIDRR legislation as such, but we have DRR related different legislations, laws, acts, which are sensitive to inclusiveness of disabled population, including other marginalized communities. So as you see from there, we are also a state of party to UNCRPD. Next. We have a separate act on rights of persons with disabilities, which basically guarantees the rights of PWDs to obtain security, rescue, and protection with priority in times of armed conflict, state of emergency, or disaster. So you can see it's very clearly mentioned about the disaster and how they need a special protection in the time. Next. Now we have these two very important legislation related to disaster in our country, and fortunately we have a very contemporary, holistic and comparatively new act on disaster risk reduction and management, which we received only in 2017. Then we have Disaster Risk Reduction National Strategic Action Plan, and both these two important legislation clearly spells out about developing a spatial plan and program for women, culture, senior citizens, or the marginalized communities, including PWDs, who are at the risk, disaster risk. So it talks about implementing it or supporting others to implement. And basically, in larger context, it talks about making the whole efforts inclusive. Next page. Similarly, we have a national policy for DRR, came in 2018, and it talks explicitly on three components. Like it talks about ensuring access, representation, and meaningful participation of PWDs in all the steps and structure of DRR. And I think it's a very clear signal that we need this integration, we need inclusiveness at all stages, all phases of disaster risk reduction and management. It also talks about making public physical infrastructure PWD and friendly. I'm not sure why it is only public. I think we need to have our private buildings also PWD friendly. And it also talks about insurance of PWD in terms of sharing and transferring risk. Next. Next. Sorry. And similarly, we have several other frameworks, guideline policies that again includes PWD's concerns And another important act is Local Government Operation Act, although it is not a DRR act, but it talks about DRR because at this moment, our local government is significantly empowered and have been transferred all 4 phases of DRR to them. So it's very important what this act talks about. And it also very clearly spells out the disabilities and how they need to be promoted, their participation, in decision-making process. So that's again a kind of, one major landmark that is included in this act, which supports inclusion of PWDs in DRR. But despite this, the existence of policies and plans for DRM at national and local level, there's a lack of a standardized process and provisions that specifically focus on groups, including PWD. So all these different, mentioning about PWDs coming through the different acts and laws have not really consistency, or there's no standard, provisions as such. So it again depends on interpretation. So let's go, and similarly, you can see there are many other laws, acts, framework, guidelines. They all are in some way, talks about disabilities. Now, these are the major gaps. I think we have, our advocacy is still weak. We have a policy gaps. There's a sincere absence of disaggregated data and information. We have data collected at different levels by different sources, but there's no consistency, there's no standardization. And so we basically not been able to make good use of it. Now there's no intersectionality within the disability. So we put everyone in the same basket. We don't differentiate. And then that's really not going to help in terms of supporting disabled population, especially disability with severity. Now we issue disability ID card, we include them in social protection, but again, there are issues because this disability card is issued only once, but severity of disability may change it over the time period. So there is no provision of, updating it. That's one of the biggest issues people are facing on the ground. There's a very limited collaboration between development partners, PWDs, and OPDs. So, and that is really limiting of making this whole process institutionalized. Of these, whatever we are doing are really scattered, sporadic, in bits and pieces. It still has to come together and get institutionalized. One of the important elements is PWDs are still looked at as a recipient of the humanitarian aid, rather than an active stakeholders in decision making. So, they are not really engaged in preparing disaster plans, emergency response plans, or in decision making. They are often looked at, that there's a recipient. So that's the only where they are taken, given care of. So that's one of the major areas we need to know. And then obviously access to information on DRR to disabled population is very limited. So that also limits their role in terms of this. Yeah, I think, that's all. I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Also on time, and then we really appreciated you really went into outlining specific challenges and gaps for implementing DIDR. So with that, Atif, you now, run from remarks by representative from the government of Maldives and also consultant from Nepal about DIDR challenges. We already know, repeatedly saying that engagement of persons with disabilities from the very beginning is important. But okay, you can elaborate more on that, but also what other things that will make the implementation of DIDR successful. Can you elaborate for 5 minutes? Floor is yours, Atif. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aiko. And I will, first of all, let me ask you if I'm very clearly audible. Everybody can hear me very clearly. Is that okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. I'm happy to hear that. I'm really sorry I couldn't join in person. I did my best, and also the ESCAP team has tried their best to bring me there, but there were some logistical issues and I couldn't join in person. But I'm happy that I can contribute virtually. So I will build on what Dr. Suman and other colleagues have mentioned about the vulnerability of the people with disabilities in disasters. In South Asian region, these areas are more prone to natural hazards like flooding, earthquake, landsliding, and in every calamity, in every hazard, the risk of the people with disabilities are the most vulnerable in all the disasters, and they lose their life. So because we have not included them in the preparatory process, and even not only people with disabilities, the people without disabilities in communities are not aware about the inclusion of disability within their preparedness. So there's a need, still there's a need of a comprehensive kind of a training or advocacy to understand disability from the social perspective. As you mentioned in the morning about toolkit, which specifically highlights the importance of the social model. So we need to understand disability from there so that we can include them in our planning processes. I will focus on one of the cases from Pakistan. In Pakistan, we have seen 3 major disasters in the last 2 decades, and we have lost a lot of life. And still, like people affected by the flooding last year, they're still in the camps, and people with disabilities are still struggling to survive there. So we in our country, the disaster management is done by National Disaster Management Authority. NDMA doesn't have any specific legislation to include people with disabilities in that, like in Nepal and the other Southeastern countries. But in 2019, they established a child and gender cell, which developed a national policy guidelines for inclusion of the vulnerable groups in disaster. That highlights a little bit about disability inclusion and the group of disabled people. But again, that's not clearly defined how to deal with different kind of disabilities, how the monitoring system, the hazard mapping, and early warning system or the preparedness will be disability inclusive. So still we need to work on that guidelines and technical detail. Plus, these are not the legislation. In Pakistan, we have legislation to protect the rights of people with disabilities started in 2018. Until 2020, we have legislation almost all over the country, which is harmonized with UNCRPD. And disability inclusive disaster reduction is mentioned in these legislation. So at least now we have some national commitments in forms of the legislation for persons with disabilities, and we have some international commitments such as UNCRPD, and we have also endorsed this entire framework for DRR. So in last few years, we have seen a visible change in terms of the interest of National Disaster Management Authority to include disability in their preparatory processes. And there is when we dig out in the background, that we have seen a very strong disability movement advocacy in the last 2 decades about DIDRR. We have seen in 2010 flood, we have seen a lot of people with disabilities when they were affected, they gathered together to advocate the humanitarian organizations and the management authority to include them. Otherwise, they were not going to survive. And in the same year, an aging and disability task force was established. It was a unique example by the DPOs, organizations of persons with disabilities. Then other humanitarian organizations and international NGOs working on disability joined that aging and disability task force. This aging and disability task force was part of all the meetings in the for the emergency responses. Again, I will quote the example of the country that in Pakistan, NDMA is coordinating with the Humanitarian Forum and UN agencies in forms of clusters, health cluster, education. And so ADTF was represented in all the clusters so that disability can be highlighted in all the issues, whether they're relevant to about shelters, education, health, food distribution. So this is how people with disabilities advocate him very strongly. And now we can feel a significant need by the authorities to include disability within their framework of disaster management and preparedness. And the recent development, we have seen that the NDMA is willing to establish a disability group or disability task force within the NDMA, so where people with disabilities will be part of it. Plus, we have also seen that people with disabilities are now being involved at the very grassroots district level by the management and NDMA and the regional officers, so that the issue of the disability inclusion can be addressed. On the other side, we are also trying to address the intersectionality of the disability in all these discussions and the policy dialogues, because people with disabilities and the minority groups and indigenous people and women with disabilities, again, they were not part of the discussion. So as a disability is not a homogeneous group. All the people with disabilities have different needs, and we need to adapt assistive technology according to the needs of people with disabilities and adapted by according to the environment of people, environment where they are living. And in different range, such as in the flood affected areas, we need a different kind of strategy for inclusion of people with disabilities. In the hilly terrains, which were affected by landsliding and earthquake, we need a different kind of strategy to people with disabilities. So I'm very much hopeful that this toolkit will be very helpful, which is just launched today. It will be extremely helpful to desensitize the stakeholders, including governments, international organizations, humanitarian networks, and as well as people with disabilities, to understand the technical information. This part is really need to be emphasized, that people with disabilities are aware about their needs and how to be resilient, but they need also the technical information about the hazard mapping. They need capacity building to be resilient with other communities, while we are conducting or preparing toolkits and trainings for the mainstream organization and management projects. So I'm very happy to answer the question. So if you have, I'm open for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Atif. Yes, thank you also for promoting this tool, but I really felt that from your presentation, the rapport building for, spending a lot of our time between government, their focal points and disability community, and also, as Dr. Suman says, like humanitarian community, and really get together and building a relationship and then plan together is a really important. So now we have about 10 minutes or so to have a more interactive discussion with this panelists. So any questions or comments from the floor? Yes, sir. I would appreciate if you can have your name and country where you're from and what you do, and please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Amanda. I'm from Fiji, the permanent rep to ESCAP. Just a quick comment on the presentations. Good to see Atif again. I met him in Jakarta last year. They were meeting last year. The presentations being done is excellent, because from our point of view, the correlation between disaster and disabilities is an important one. We cannot divorce these two important issues, because as we saw in the presentation, in Asia Pacific region, the number is about 16%. Yeah. And with forecast of climate change coming worse due to rising temperature goals, rising temperatures, we expect this correlation, to continue to be important and increase. Therefore, I agree with Lani from Palau that disability inclusion is required. This is a process, not only inclusion in terms of policies, processes, but I think in decision making as well. Like my brother here was saying, that's always a challenge in including disabilities in decision making, because you know what is best for you, you know what is how best the process of the system can treat you. So I really agree with that. And in terms of the disability DIDRR, I will encourage you, ma'am, please deploy it to our member countries.
Oh, thank you very much. I would like to speak more in detail with
It's very important that you broaden the stakeholder base for all our stakeholders in all countries in Asia Pacific to understand this important aspect for the work that our that our disabilities community really needs to be looked after, particularly when the challenges are rising against them. Thank you very much. Sorry, I have to leave for another commitment. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for declaring your commitment, and I'd like to once again speak to you, sir, after this session. And we know that Mr. Setaraki Makanawi, who is Fijian and a very CEO of Pacific Disability Forum, I'm sure he's working with your department, and so we look forward to working together more. Any questions or comments from the floor? Let's go to our Zoom participants. I don't see any questions expressed in who? May I? Oh, Matthew. Okay, Matthew. Yes. Welcome to the event, Matthew. And then if you can introduce yourself and then raise your questions or comments to whoever the panelist, or you can make comments for questions to everybody. Thank you.
So thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and thank you very much for organizing this very important meeting today. I'm very pleased to see that. My name is Matisma. I'm the chair of the ARI Task Force on Disability, Climate and Disasters. And I really loved the presentation and the practical tools presented today. I might like to add one more question. For example, I know, Mohammed Atif, you know how close you are, you know, both to the policies at the international and the national level, but also to the field. And I might direct actually my question, because we've done great progresses, you know, when you look at the incorporation of disability within Sendai frameworks and the work, you know, at the national levels, which still varies from countries to countries, but we've definitely seen a progress, you know, in the last decade. But when working in the field, especially at a very local level, I see still so many challenges, especially with the local decision makers or local emergency responders. Almost like, you know, the work we've done at the bigger level hasn't yet percolated. And what would be your, you know, suggestions on the way forward to really ensure that those higher level policies do translate into action at the very local level, especially that's where the response arises right after the disasters. So I'd love to hear you on that one, and please also feel free to answer if any other person in the panel would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Matthew. So Atif, a question is for you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Good to see you here. And thanks for asking a very kind of very particular question, which is which I always highlight, that when we go in the field, people with disabilities themselves are not prepared to accept their disabilities. That's a very big challenge. Like they have not even modified their houses, and they're depending on their communities all the time. So when communities are not resilient, people with disabilities, there's no question that they will be safe. They will be in the most in a difficult situation. So what we are trying to do, we have done a pilot project some years ago with some international organizations, that we prepare people with disabilities to understand the basics of resilience and how to protect themselves, how to prepare themselves for any kind of disaster, to reduce the risk of disaster. One thing. Secondly, the policy to reduce the gap between the international frameworks, national policies, and the real practices, the real situation. We have been trying to bring them up. As you have seen, that we have sent some people with disabilities to the parliament to speak about their resilience, about their resolution and when disaster occurred. We sent them to the global platform in Geneva. They spoke there. what they feel about disability without any concern what's going on there. So this is how we are trying to break this gap. We are building the capacity of people with disabilities at the grassroots level. At the same time, we are connecting them with the local humanitarian organizations, local actors or local authorities, so that they can understand first the disability, then disaster and disability inclusion in the disaster management or the emergency response. So it's a huge work still we need to do. I totally agree with you that we have seen a very significant development in the last 2 decades, especially after the Sendai framework. We have clearly seen that the disability is a buzzword and people are willing to learn more about it. But still there is a huge work required to build the capacities or the understanding of the knowledge management for people with disabilities and humanitarian organization and the policymaker. So still we need to go a far way.
Thank you very much. I mean, as we say, the last mile connectivity, I mean, the importance wise at the community level action, empowering persons with disabilities and working with the community organizers and also government at that level. So with that, I think I would like to ask Dr. Suman for your final comments about like, you know, I mean, okay, speaking of importance of community level action, but any thoughts, final thoughts?
I think
Mike?
I think there is still a huge gap between the policy and practices, so we have to take down our efforts to the field level, because it's good to have these things reflected, exclusively in the acts, policies, legislation that sets a tone that gives you a good foundation, but then that itself will not lead to the actual results on the ground. So we have to take all these to the field. So we have to connect policy and practices, and we have to make sure that practices inform policies, then other way around. Then only those policies will be realistic, implementable, and helpful at the field level. So I just spoken about some of the gaps and challenges, and I think we need to simultaneously work on all those different aspects. But one of the key I understand is this disaggregated data that is very important, and obviously awareness, knowledge building, where I think this e-learning course will be a big support, because even people who are working in this field, within the institution itself, there is no harmonization now. There is no, there is no, they are not on the same page in a way. They all are approaching in a different way to this issue. So I think those things we need to work on, and we need to understand that PWDs are not only the recipient. They can also make, they can also help in taking right decisions, particularly when they are for them. Because we do lots of, integration of PWDs concerned in design, development, but when it comes to, involving them, engaging them, having their perceptions and opinion, is often not there. So even if you do that, it's not always very comfortable or mean to them. So in those areas, I think their participation needs to be improved, and they have to have good information on the as well in order to have their contribution in the decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suman. So, Ms. Farusha, having heard from all these people about the engaging community, community of persons with disabilities at the community level, local level, central level, you are at the central level. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about making changes at different levels, and your final thoughts about this whole event or tool or your country's commitment?
Thank you. Just as a last and final comment, I just would like to highlight what Dr. Suman has already spoken about. It's about involving PWDs in decision making and making the policies. It's often seen that we talk on behalf of them, or it's the NGOs that is talking on behalf of them. But we need to do advocations, we need to do other, whatever is required to strengthen their contribution when it comes to them. So involving or participating the PWDs at different angle in national forums, in international forums, or maybe in sessions like these where I believe that there would be the best people to talk about themselves and how they can contribute in terms of policy making and bringing whatever requirement or required changes to the policies or the programs or is ongoing. Or in other words, if I may say, even we always talk about the challenges that the PWDs might be facing, or the challenges they might be having in terms of participating or contributing to DRR. So what I believe is our work should be more on strengthening their participation, understanding from them, or let them speak on themselves about the challenges or the why the hesitancy is there when it comes to participating in these programs. So that would be my final comment from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we like to, with that, we like to thank all the panelists and those who ask questions and comments and express their commitments to the IDR. And for this project we are doing together, SDD and IDD, we launched the English-based e-learning tool, but we will also have a customized tool in Nepal and then Pakistan and Philippines and Laos. So please stay in touch with us. And with that, I'd like to ask Madhu to finish this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think, we had in our agenda that we are closing, but I think our panelists have summarized, the opportunities and the challenges, and the fact that while there are challenges, there have been progress made. And that is something that we really should take away from this session, that we are moving towards progress. So thank you for attending the session. I know this session went over a little bit, but thank you for staying with us. And we will see you in our, maybe our next session. We have a launch of the State of the Climate Report at 12:45. And then we have our closing of the committee as well. So thank you very much. And thank you for participating. Thank you.